Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Soul Rising podcast. I'm your host, Amanda McCoy Flanagan. I'm so happy that you have chosen to join me today. We are all in on love, loss, and connection here, which means we talk the full gamut, the full spectrum of emotions and the way that they serve us or don't serve us in terms of connecting to ourselves, to others, and to the universe, God, source, whatever. Today, I have my friend Annah Elizabeth. We actually recorded this about a month ago, and my mic went out after like 3 minutes, and we didn't know. Well, I kind of knew there was an issue, but I thought it was resolved. And when I went to listen back, we only had really 3 minutes of an hour conversation. So, Annah, thank you so much for being here again.
It's always perfect timing, right?
Yes, it's going to be great second time around. So I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about Annah. She is part of the Get Griefy collective that I talk about all the time. It's going to be a little bit different today in terms of what we're going to talk about. We're going to be pushing some boundaries, testing some common, I guess you could say conceptions or misconceptions of grief. So I think it's going to be really super cool and interesting. So you're in for a treat. Okay, so Annah is a speaker, healing specialist, and the creator of the Five Facets Philosophy on healing, an intrinsic human blueprint that reveals how people are wired to think, feel, respond, relate, and find meaning in their lives. With nearly 2 decades of experience supporting individuals and communities through conflict, grief, and life transition, her work bridges science-informed insight with soul-level wisdom. That's always the best, right? You got to bridge both. It's all. I always say, is it science? Is it spirit? It's both, right? Rather than focusing on fixing what's broken, Annah's approach centers on identity, awareness, and potential, helping people understand themselves and one another more clearly so healing becomes sustainable, compassionate, and empowering. Her work reframes unconditional love not as a feeling, but as a lived practice, a way of being, and a stabilizing force in times of uncertainty and division. Amen to that. Annah is a founder of Heartwise Healing Solutions and is known for creating grounded, accessible conversations that invite deep reflection, practical insight, and meaningful transformation. Her message resonates with seekers, leaders, and change makers who are ready to engage in the next frontier of human healing, where love, identity, and conscious choice shape how we live, lead, relate, and evolve. Annah, you're so amazing. I'm so happy to have you here. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back. And I do believe it's always perfect timing.
It works out the way it's supposed to. The technology gods sometimes work for us in mysterious ways. We don't really know.
Yep.
Here we are. So let's
actually, you weren't the only one. I had two interviews, your podcast and something else, and both of them had to be redone. So I was like, wow, there's something really going on here.
We're in Mercury retrograde, and I don't know if that, like, when we recorded, if we were feeling that. I think maybe it was a little bit before that, but I know sometimes we can feel that disruption before and after. And Mercury retrograde, as we know, is classic for technological disturbance. Yep. So no surprise. So, okay, but why don't we start with you telling us a little bit more about the 5 facets, your philosophy on grieving, healing, living, all the things.
Yes, thank you. And if I may, I'm just going to kind of preface this with my story and how the 5 facets came to be. So I've always been a helper. And then there was a period of 6-year, 10-month string of back-to-back significant life loss events, as I call them, that put me on a trajectory of how I was going to show up and really support people in this world. And that string of losses began with the death of my firstborn child following unexpected delivery complications 26 minutes after he was born. And hours after I heard those words, I'm sorry he didn't make it, I had this distinct thought that I didn't want to spend a lifetime mourning him. And what I say is at that time, I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know what it looked like on the other side or how the heck I was going to get there. Mm-hmm. But that seed had been planted. I didn't want to spend a lifetime mourning him. Over that next 6 years and 10 months, I would experience 2 second trimester miscarriages, 2 complicated but successful pregnancies, a 6-week psychiatric stay for severe depression, And one final pregnancy, 6 weeks before that child was born, I discovered that my husband and my best friend were having an affair. Wow. So as many of the people who are watching and listening to this have an experience, sometimes losses compound, sometimes they come in multiples. And during that period of time, there was one question that drove me forward. And that is, how is it that some people go on to live happy, fulfilled lives following tragedy, mishap, or mayhem, while others succumb to drugs, despair, a life of void, or suicide? Mm-hmm. That one question literally spawned thousands more questions, and I relentlessly pursued the answers. I've been asked twice, actually, in the last few weeks in different presentations, that did I set out to create a framework? And I absolutely did not set out to build a framework or to understand grief. And, at the end of the day, we all just want to feel better. And going back to, I really think that part of it was that seed that was planted. My son's name is Gavin. And after I heard that and that thought, I didn't want to spend a lifetime mourning him. And around that same time, there were two sort of national, international stories that were going live. One was actually a story that I'd been introduced to about an African boy who harnessed the power of the wind and created a working windmill in the face of a famine due to drought. And the other one was Elizabeth Smart. Many people may know her story. And right about the time of my loss, I had read something about her where she had started playing the harp again. I believe it was the harp. And I remember in that moment thinking, there's just something within each one of us that can allow us to transcend something that many people would find unimaginable. Those two were actually, they were my beacons. They were my driving force, in addition to the other stories that I had heard. And so I really was seeking to understand that human spirit that really can achieve anything, no matter the circumstance. So ultimately, and when I wrote my memoir, Digging for the Light, and I know if you've written a book, any of our watchers and listeners the viewers who have written even a paper in high school, the first draft is always kind of the easy part. It's all the editing and dissecting it that takes a long time. And it was in one of the later edits of that book. And so it chronicles that 7-year period, and not just the losses. I call it a reflective memoir because it's what the thoughts and actions that I had that actually brought me up out of the devastation of each of those events. And when I wrote about the morning of the affair, what I wrote is every piece of hope I'd ever held on to before had just been shredded. My faith in God, in dignity, and trust, every spiritual, emotional, social, physical, and academic part of me laid in a heap to be tossed out with the garbage. It never made it to the garbage. I recycled it instead. And it was in one of the later edits, not too long before I went to publication, those 5 things stood off the page almost at me. And I heard this little whisper that said, "That's it." And I thought, that's what? And it was, that's the answer to the question that you've been asking. And I know you mentioned about, science and spirituality. At the time I was developing all of this work, I was 100% science-based. If I couldn't see it, touch it, it didn't exist. And as the universe, as I call it, had it, eventually I could no longer talk or analyze away the spiritual experiences that I was having. And once I got dropped into the deep end of the spiritual ocean, as I say, I realized that my son Gavin and I have a soul contract to do this work. Him from the other side of the veil and me from this side. And so we really are collaborating on this. So I started exploring those 5 facets. And ultimately, what I discovered, these are the 5 universal gifts that we are all born with. Every single one of us is born with the exact same gifts It's just the details that comprise them are different. And those 5 facets are the academic, emotional, physical, social, and spiritual sides of the self. And so it's an ability to learn, to feel, to connect. We're born into a physical body and a physical environment. And then that divine self or soul or spirit within basically are the brief descriptions of them. So as I continued to explore those even more deeply, what I realized is each one of us has those facets exist in a hierarchy that's unique to each one of us. And they, depending on the structure of our facets hierarchy, they influence and impact everything that we're experiencing in life in different ways. The facet that's at the top of your hierarchy is literally driving the bus of you. It's the lens from which you see and experience all life, and it simultaneously drives your suffering and your success. As you move down your own personal hierarchy, each facet has less daily impact and influence on your life. And by the time you get to the bottom facet, that bottom facet is kind of what I liken to out of sight, out of mind. So the top facet has to be basically managed, and the bottom facet has to be intentionally supported. And what I found is that once we're able to understand our own personal hierarchy and what is driving, so this where so many models look at what's happening to us and outside of us, this truly looks at 100% what is happening through us and within us. And then we're able to understand how we're reacting, how we're relating, why we are connected to certain aspects of life more than others. And it's my belief that if we can understand this hierarchy structure, not only can we better understand ourselves, we can better understand one another.
That is really awesome, Anna. Thank you for that explanation. There was a lot in there, and I was just jotting notes because there was stuff that I want to touch
Try to
on.
make it as succinct.
I know, and you did really well in a short amount of time. Awesome. So with these 5 facets, have you found over the course of the years of studying them, working with people, that related to how people, the resilience, or how some people make, I guess, lemonade out of lemons, all that. Do one of these facets play more of a part in that? Like say if my spiritual facet is the top of my hierarchy, will I have a harder time or an easier time or just more insight? Do either of them speak to our ability to move forward?
Not individually, no. What happens is they're the lens from which we see and experience life in varying degrees. And that's how we interpret what is happening around us in conjunction with everything that we're learning and hearing and being conditioned to know or perceive. And so understanding the facets is it's a tool for understanding yourself first, and then we can the whole program that I have is we move through and we gain insight into what people's current processes are to date. And so I use often the analogy of making a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. And I presented that question to thousands of people. How do you make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich? So for how would you say, I ask you that question, how do you make a peanut butter and jelly sandwich?
I'm not going to answer it and trying to outwit you or get too creative. I'm going to tell you, I put peanut butter on one side, jelly on one side, and then I put it together.
Yep. And of the thousands of people that I presented that to, and social work conferences and individuals, one-on-one clients, that is the common answer. Take 2 slices of bread, put peanut butter on one, jelly on another, put them together, and then enjoy them. But the true process is first you have to bake, borrow, or buy the ingredients. Then you have to choose your utensils. Are you going to spread the peanut butter and jelly with a fork, with a spoon, with a butter knife or a butcher knife? Are you going to make it on the bare counter, on a paper towel, on a plate? You have to open all the containers, slice the bread if it's not pre-sliced.
Uh-huh.
And you have to coat one side, coat another side, and put the two coated sides together. Because what happens if you put the non-coated sides together?
Not going to stick. Yeah.
Right? It's not going to stick and it's going to be really messy,
Messy.
kind of like life can be sometimes. So the reason I use that example in the framework of grief and success, of struggle and success, is because what it shows is that there's a process of doing something that we've done so many times it becomes rote, automatic, and we don't even recognize the steps that we're taking. And so now we understand our own hierarchy. Coming back to your question, I was like, what do we do with it? And then I started pouring through all of the answers from those other questions that I had, and all of the themes that revealed themselves became a part of this 5-module coaching program that I developed. And so now what we're doing prior to being able to determine and create our personal hierarchy structure is we're gaining insight into who is Amanda? What are Amanda's processes to date? How has she navigated struggle and success? Where is her natural leaning? Is she going to the spiritual facet? And remember, what is at the top is literally driving your suffering and your success simultaneously. So oftentimes, and this is very broad brush because again, how it shows up in each person's life is different, but you use the example of the spiritual facet. So oftentimes with someone, say, who has their spiritual facet at the top of their hierarchy, they have just this deep knowing that everything is going to be okay. Similar to that thought that I had after Gavin died. And more importantly, they go inward rather than outward. So they tend to be someone who might go into meditation, might go into yoga or into nature, something that just brings them into their self. It could be the art, maybe they're an artist and it's just that movement of creation that actually it's the expression of their soul. So there's so many different forms of how that could show up. So on the one side, when they are feeling successful, when they are feeling lit up, when they feel like they are fulfilling what their soul came here to do, that facet is always in the mix. At the same time, however, that facet is always in the mix when they're struggling. And it's a matter of recognizing those patterns. So for instance, my social facet is at the top of my hierarchy. So when I'm doing what I'm doing right now, when I'm connecting with people, when I'm serving people, when I'm sharing, when I'm understanding people, when I'm supporting people, when I'm connecting, I feel lit up. I know that this is what I'm here and meant to do, as cliche as that sounds.
Yeah.
And yet people are always in the mix. If I stumble over a word, they say the average person has 70,000 thoughts, and I don't even want to know how many thoughts go through this brain in a day. And most of those we don't recognize, and the vast majority of the ones we don't recognize are negative. And so it's seeing them and catching them. So it's like, oh my gosh, are they going to think I'm illiterate? Oh my God, right? Those thoughts are flying through. And I have to just know, I'm like, okay, I see you and I recognize what you are, and just not let them derail me. So what happens is when we can understand that facets hierarchy and how it is influencing our life, now we're in a better place to be able to put these facets to work for them in positive ways, in achieving what I call your next level potential, whatever that looks like for you. If you're in active, fresh grief and that next level potential is just to feel better and to be able to get out of bed, then that's your next level potential. There's no right or wrong.
Yeah, I love that you use the words natural leaning, and that's a very much a coaching sort of principle, to where we don't suggest that you should change or be something different or make yourself into something that you're not. Like I personally like to use with my clients, let's see who you are. Like, for example, a woman that I'm working with wants to have a better routine, a better schedule, but she really thrives in flexibility. So how do we create some kind of routine and schedule when you really just love being a free spirit and being able to, pivot on a dime? So I love
Yep.
that it's not like, okay, well, I'm not, say the emotional is at 3 or 4. It's not, let's make that, bring that up to certain, no, it's like seeing where you are, accepting where you are, embracing who you are, and then let's use that as a springboard for that potential.
Exactly. Right? Yep. The facet structure is like your intrinsic blueprint of literally how you come wired into the world. And it's no right or wrong. I've always used a diamond as a gem as my brand anchor. And each one of the facets has their own color branding. But it's interesting. I had someone last year say to me, these facets truly are like diamonds. And I was like, wow. And when you look at that, diamonds, you cannot change them, but you can harness the power of them. And that is one question that I ask early on. So this whole process, Gavin turned 35. I'm aging myself here, but Gavin turned 35 last Mother's Day. And so I've been working on this. It was about 10 years in when I was really kind of collecting data. It still hadn't formed yet. I still hadn't discovered the 5 facets. So it's been about 16, 17 years, 18-ish since I first stumbled on that. And one of the first questions I asked is, do they change? Because some models, when we look at various personality, like profiling archetypes, they change as we evolve and grow and mature. And I've been getting over and over and over again that the structure doesn't change. We literally come wired into the world with a hierarchy structure. But what does change is how we understand and support them.
Excellent point. Excellent point. I love that. This is really super cool. I want to also I want to switch gears a little bit here. And I want to talk about, you use a phrase when you held Gavin or when you heard those words or whatever it was, and you said, I do not want to spend my life mourning forever. Right. In this griefy space that we're in, to suggest that people, we like to use the words move forward, but I think to suggest that we don't grieve forever or that we don't have to feel grief forever. And of course, it's different for everybody. And if listeners, watchers, if you're like, no, like that's who I am, I will grieve forever, then great. That's what works for you, right? But I love your take on this, Anna, where it's like, and I've heard you talk about this in other places, that we don't have to spend our life mourning. Can you tell us more about that? And maybe why it's kind of like a taboo thing to even suggest?
Yeah. So it's multi-layered. One thing is, I believe this has been passed down for centuries. We as children, we hear it. We hear our parents. We hear community people. We hear teachers. We hear other people saying, I'm never going to get over this.
That it's like a betrayal, right? That it's almost that feeling of like, I'm being disloyal.
So for some people, and that was a part of my experience, and it's one that we see in people who are grieving sometimes, that there can be a feeling of disloyalty or negating what happened if we start feeling better. It's not uncommon for people to feel a little bit of guilt or shame the first time, especially when it comes to death. Now, as you know, my work, I talk about things that are far beyond death. Loss is, and this is so layered. We could have about 5 different podcast episodes on this. So in this culture, especially, but in many cultures, we have this underlying belief that the death of a human is the ultimate loss. And there is an expression that I was introduced to early on after Gavin died, and that is that child loss is the worst loss. And so in the years preceding his death, I believed that. I believe that, okay, I've experienced the worst possible thing a human can experience. And when I discovered the affair between my husband and my best friend, what I can tell you is that that grief response felt as significant, if not worse, than the death of my child. And what happened for me is that myth that I had been taught, and I do say that it is a myth or misnomer. It's a misguided truth, and I'm going to elaborate on that for everybody that's watching and listening. So please stay with me. What happened is it's one of those things, those aspects that can hold us in a conflict and grief pattern. So kind of where I ended up is I was really struggling was, Anna, you've already experienced the worst possible thing a human can go through. Why are you crying over spilt milk?
Mm.
And so that was when I immediately realized that loss and grief are, number one, they're two completely separate things. We tend to marry loss and grief.
Yeah.
And I believe that when we do that, we actually deny one aspect of our experience. So loss is an event where someone or something tangible or abstract goes missing from your life, and grief is your individual response to that loss. Those are the simple definitions that I've adopted.
So what happens, and then the emotion. So the loss.
Correct. The loss is the event, and then so the response is predominantly emotion, but it incorporates so many more aspects of, right? When we look across those 5 facets, academic, emotional, physical, social, and spiritual, they're all going to be impacted in some way. And we're going to interpret them based on our conditioning and what we've learned, and also our facet structure. So going back to loss is more than death. And when I talk about, and I try to be very mindful when I'm presenting or doing my own work to make sure that, because when we talk about the death, like the death of a child, it's easy to get stuck there. And then these other things seem like, oh, they're just an aside, and they're not. There is no hierarchy to loss other than what we set for ourselves. So at the time, Gavin's death was absolutely the worst thing that I had experienced to date. And not that I want to project any future hardship on anybody else. The point that I like to make is that if your loss feels significant, regardless of what it is, then it is significant. And there's no person or structure that should be imposing on you what should or shouldn't be significant.
Okay, I'm gonna challenge that for a second here. What about sudden and unexpected, like traumatic losses? Doing something to the brain that maybe, the loss of my 87-year-old grandmother that was sick for 5 years and I knew it was coming. Do you think that there's anything physically different between these losses that could make one more, I don't know, severe? I mean, I get what you're saying, that everybody's different, and my loss of my 87 grandmother could feel completely traumatic compared to the loss of your 87 grandmother, 87-year-old grandmother. I totally get that, but I'm saying on like a bodily, physiological standpoint in terms of trauma, do you think that plays a part?
I'll be honest. Ultimately, what is coming to my mind is, again, it's how you're relating to that. So let's say the 87-year-old grandma that had been ill for 5 years versus somebody who dropped dead, like my son. I mean, it was a classic picture perfect textbook pregnancy.
Wow.
And what he died from is very common in childbirth. What is uncommon is that it's fatal.
Okay.
So we have all of these layers. My personal belief is, again, it's how we relate, and I'm going to use the word attach. So it's how we attach to and identify that which has gone missing from our life.
Mhm.
So using the example of that 87-year-old grandmother, that 87-year-old grandmother actually was more of a parent and a role model
Yeah.
to you. If you had been her caretaker, if you had, right, if she had been your confidant, even during her times of illness. So you do have time to put certain things into place
Mhm.
to be able to help navigate that loss. And yet again, it's different. And one of the things that I say is we may know that somebody is nearing the end, but until that last breath is actually drawn, there's always hope that there's going to be more time. And so whether it's sudden or whether, ultimately in many cases, it feels sudden, whether it's
Yes.
the end of 5 years or whether it's 1 minute I'm in labor and next minute nurses are coming in and they're pushing a clipboard at my husband and saying, we need to sign these papers. And I'm like, what's going on? And they're like, there's a problem with the baby and we need to do an emergency C-section now.
Mhm.
And so again, it's also some of those perceptions that we have. And this goes into a whole nother context. But as I was raising Gavin's siblings that came after him, I always had this quote, which and this little plaque that I still have, and it says, "Parents give their children two things: one is roots, and the other is wings." And I always knew that my children weren't mine.
Mm. Yeah.
I brought them
Yeah.
into this world. And so for me, that sense of understanding that was a part of my sort of intrinsic nature was a part, I'm not going to deny it was a part in where I went and how I grew. I didn't have that same level of attachment and identity as a
Yes.
mom, as like mom, the mom role is the ultimate role for me in this lifetime. And I know many women who do have and adopt that, and there's no right or wrong. Again, it's for me, as you said, in your coaching work, helping you understand who you are. And so helping people understand what that loss means to them and how their facet structure and what areas within that, how the facet structure is influencing and impacting it. And then also which facets are being impacted by the circumstance so they can gain insight. And what I always say is, where are you at? Where do you want to go? And then how can we help you get there? And that really, in all of this complexity of all of these terms. So for some people, yes, that traumatic, sudden nature can be more challenging for them. And yet I also know people who are grateful that it wasn't a long, drawn out
Mm.
suffering.
Yes, yes. I love that we're going here with this conversation, which isn't really what we had planned, but like this is, it always comes out. All right, what needs to come out comes out. I wrote down earlier, probably about 20 minutes ago. Um,
We've been talking that long. Wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, we've
Okay.
been going for about
Yep.
a half an hour. So what I wrote was not wanting to lose a part of themselves. Okay. Not wanting to lose it. So holding on to the grief as if I let this thing go or release it, then I am essentially releasing a part of myself and my identity that I attached to it. So I love when you said the word attached, it sparked again that thought that and what I had written down. And I wonder if some people they hold on to this. So it's like the grandmother, right? Like she represented warmth and comfort. And she was that person that held me, or I felt supported and never judged, right? That could mean so much more to a person
Mm-hmm.
than
Yeah.
even to a
And
child. Like it's crazy to try and wrap your head around this, but
mhm.
it's true. It's what we're attaching to it, the
Yeah.
meaning of our own selves and identity. That is the hardest to release, let go of.
Yeah. And so for some, words have so much power. And when I'm communicating with people, I tend to spend a great deal of time of understanding how they are relating to particular words. So for some people, the word attachment, it's like, "Ugh." And then, but for other people, it's how do you identify and relate to? And so, I want to say that because I'm sure we're going to have some listeners who are going to be triggered in some way by the word attachment. And going back to, I'm going to jump back just a little bit because your question was about grief not lasting forever. And then I think you kind of had two questions in one, and I went to the
Probably.
No,
Probably.
I mean, that's okay. That's what makes these organic conversations, I think, so beautiful. And so one of the first things that I learned, and it is very contradictory to, or opposite, I want to say, of what most people say, is that our grief lasts forever. We just learn to change it. We just learn to live with it. We just learn to modify it. I personally do not subscribe to that. And the reason being is because Henry Ford, automaker Henry Ford, had a quote, and I'm going to butcher this quote. I believe it is, if you think you can, you can. And if you think you can't, you can't. Something along those lines.
Yeah.
If you believe that your grief is going to last an entire lifetime, that is likely a greater likelihood that that will be your experience.
Can you give us a definition of grief first? How would you define when you say if you think your grief will last forever?
It is your grief, to me, in my definition in this body of work, is your individual response to your loss event. So grief is your response.
Okay. Okay.
And
so just like a painful, sad thing.
Well, it could be anything, right? Some people dive into work. Some people, right? They just go headstrong into work. And I'm trying to remember who it is. I'm pretty sure that it's also someone in the collective. And I don't even want to name a name in case I get it wrong. When their child died, in this particular case, it was a child that died, and the husband dove into school. So he was going to school studying to get a college degree, and he dove headfirst, even harder, into education, into his schooling. He had the greatest, like, grade point average, the greatest semester that he'd had. She felt like he wasn't grieving the death of their child. She thought
I know what you're talking about.
She thought he wasn't mourning. And when they ultimately sat down and talked, and if I'm remembering correctly, he said, this was the one thing that I could control, that I could do. I could have the best grades and get this degree done and be the best provider possible based on this. That was something he could control. And so, again, it's like some of us have emotional responses. Some of us question God and some of us question logic. Some of us question science. It's going to be different for everybody. And so emotion, to wrap this up, emotion could be a part of it, but it's not just that. And one thing, I'm just being guided and reminded to drop this in. So our facets hierarchy is not about what we do. It's who we intrinsically are.
Okay.
And so coming back to grief, does that definition kind of...
Yes.
In the example?
Your response. It's exactly what you said. It's whatever you do in response to it. I was just thinking about kind of shifting or transmuting grief, and looking at grief that's what the question came from, was thinking about maybe transmuting grief into service, or another way that my grief is with me, but I'm using it in this other way.
And sometimes it does. It becomes, look at a number of people in the collective, right? So many people in the collective say, oh my gosh, I didn't find what I needed, and so I created it. And, as I said,
pain into purpose.
Pain into purpose. And as I said, I didn't set out to do that. So many people call themselves a grief specialist. I've never once called myself that. I call myself a healing specialist because everything that I do is focused on how we heal. And ultimately, I think we all at some point in our life have said some version of this or asked this question: how am I going to survive this? How am I going to navigate this? How am I going to get through this? What the F am I going to do? Ultimately, underneath that question is, how am I going to heal?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right. And so now coming back to grief, because I want to make sure we have time to
Yeah.
to to lean into that. So grief not lasting forever, and that Henry Ford quote, that's all beautiful, right? The truth of the matter is that loss event and your grief response is always going to be a part of your overall life experience. And not to minimize it, just like us having this podcast today, you and I in this discussion, it will always be a part of our overall existence. You had a car wreck and you had an injury, or you have emotional trauma from that. That will always be a part of your overall life experience. And yet, that to me doesn't mean that we have to carry that conflict forever. I have a theory that so far has not been debunked, and that is all conflict that we have, as we know, conflict stems from some unresolved grief. Remembering that grief could be from job loss, it could be loss of physical security, financial security, loss of emotional security, loss
Childhood wishes, fantasies, relationships, friendship.
yes,
There's so much.
hopes and dreams. Yep, absolutely. And so now we get to choose. So loss and grief, the event and the response, are what I call unempowering, because we seldom have a say in when and how and where our loss event is going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
Even if it's grandma who's dying and hospice is there, and we don't know when that last second.
We can't ever prepare, right? Trying to prepare. Right? So that's what I was thinking as you were talking about having that time. You never really know how you're going to feel until it happens.
No. And it's just different, right? So I remember when Gavin died, and this is twice now, this has come up in thought in this conversation. Okay. So after he died, I remember we had the nursery already, right? Everything was all ready to bring him home. And I remember while I was off of our bedroom, and I remember thinking how empty it was and how sad I was that I was never going to be able to nurse him or rock him in that antique rocker that I had. And one day I had this very distinct realization that also, and this was a part of my healing, it doesn't mean it's going to be right for everybody, but I also realized that on the flip side of that, I wasn't having to worry that, oh my gosh, he was there in the crib an hour ago and now he's gone. What happened to him? Where did he go? And so it's just different. To me, it's an important distinction to realize that whatever our grief response and emotional feelings and thoughts are, they're just different. And yet there's so many threads and commonalities across them. And so my personal experience, going back to that thought about not wanting to spend a lifetime mourning Gavin, I eventually did figure out what I wanted. And that was to be able to celebrate his life. And going back to that peanut butter and jelly sandwich, right? In the process, we have to find our sort of new sea legs. And when I first had that realization and I would be talking with people, I would say, now I celebrate his 26 minutes of life. Right? And then as I continued to learn more about myself and learn more about all of this in the modality, I thought, why do I have to quantify it?
Mm.
Why do I have to quantify anything?
Yeah.
And so now I say, I celebrate his life. And
Yeah.
I am living proof that you can, what I call full spectrum healing.
Yes.
And so I healed the human side of myself and I healed the spiritual side of myself and the energy body. I know you and I talked in the previous, we talked quite a bit about, if I remember correctly, the energy body. The energy body, for those who are interested or open to it, everything is made up of energy. So the human body and the spirit or the soul body are both comprised of energy and how that influences. And so you can 100%, and I believe this is true for all of us, you can 100% heal no matter your adversity or your circumstance. And those healing, what is going to go into your healing is going to be a different combination of things for each one of us. And I believe that I've been preaching it, so to speak, for over 20 years. And I do believe that. And I'm so grateful for you being open to it because there are many people who really have struggled with understanding that. Because when we're in the throes of, and here's the other thing, here's the other piece of, I think it's kind of magical. When we're in the throes of whatever our conflict is, it feels forever. It feels forever. It feels like it's not going to end. And there's actually, I talked about this. I'm just wrapping up a 12-month series of monthly events. And in one of them, I talk about time. And there's actually a mathematical equation about why our grief and our days feel so much longer. And in a nutshell, it's, when you're a child, every day feels forever.
Yeah.
That's because and now I got to make sure I get this right. That's because each day is a larger percentage of your overall lifespan.
Yep.
And as you get older, each day is scientifically, mathematically, a smaller percentage of your overall day. So that's why the days feel longer when we're younger and so much faster as we get older. It's like, where's the time gone, right? And so, but what that means is that when we're faced with a loss event, something that is unfamiliar now, we are actually like that 5-year-old. And I ran the numbers. It's like a 5-year-old to a 30-year-old. I can't even remember the percentage difference in the day. But so now we're like that 5-year-old, let's say, when we have this loss event. And so now we're learning to live in a different frame. And so it is kind of like we're a younger version of I don't want to say a new life, because I think that's something that also sets us up for failure. But now we're experiencing something that's unfamiliar, that's new. And so the longer we live with it, we have time doesn't heal wounds. We heal our wounds in time. And I believe if we're open to it and we can use that time to, again, better understand what the loss event means to us across our entire existence, we can use that insight to fuel us to go wherever we want.
Totally. It's what we do in that time, right?
Correct.
I could have 5 years, you could have 5 years out from the same loss, and I could do nothing and just not find that. And you could take steps, even force yourself sometimes. Sometimes a lot of this, I believe, is like, I really don't want to, but I'm going to do it. If I can get this little glimmer, this little moment of inspiration, right? And take advantage of that. I think that's how.
Yeah, absolutely. And on and this is another trajectory, but on a soul level, sometimes that 5 years of sitting in the crying is a part of
Necessary.
our path. My belief is if we're able to say, okay, this is where I'm at with what I have right now, and this is what I'm doing without pulling out the hammer and feeling shame. Now, granted, and I have to say this in, integrity, not a doctor here by any means. But if you're somebody who is not moving forward at all in a 5-year period and you're really to that degree of suffering, I would encourage to seek out a trusted support medical person who can help you. Because if you're not able to get out of bed for that length and period of time, it compounds itself.
Yeah.
Physiologically, it has an impact that can compound within the body. And so, not from a place of judgment,
Sure.
but from a place of looking at the overall picture.
Exactly.
And it's fine. It's just really finding, which sometimes can be a little challenging, finding the person that you trust, that grandma that was just always there to lift you up and support you, and that there's connection there.
Thank you for saying that. I appreciate you saying that, because it is not from a place of judgment that some of us in this work suggest or recommend or whatever, that you do seek some kind of help. This is a very touchy topic and it's very nuanced, right? But like, at what point are we doing people a disservice by just saying, okay, just don't ever try to move forward? Like, yeah, you're going to turn to drugs. You're going to turn to something to numb out. You're eventually you could kill yourself, right? My personal mission is to help people live more inspired lives to where their energy is on a higher vibration that can then serve their lives and the collective. Like, I feel like we all have a reason for being here. And I think personally, I have an obligation to try to help the world, the people around me and the world around me in whatever way that I can. I think that's why I'm here. And I think that's why most of us are here. So it's a touchy thing, and it's delicate. It's definitely a delicate conversation to say, okay, all right, now we have to move forward. Like, but that's just what I personally believe, which is why I don't work in certain spaces anymore.
Right.
Kind of co-sign the like acute stage forever. There's a reason why it's called acute. Right. Why there's different levels.
One of the things that I've said for decades is what is so perfectly poignantly right for one person can be so horrifically, horribly wrong for another.
Yeah.
And for some reason, when we're talking about time, I think somebody needs to hear this. So all the years that I've been in this space, one of the things that I've seen over and over and over again is that around the 3-year mark, it is not uncommon for people to experience a level of grief that is as significant or feels more significant than the onset of the grief. And this is what I've discovered. And that is, in the first year, especially if it's a traumatic event, which so many of them are, you have a relationship that ends, you discover an affair, you're in an automobile accident and you have physical injuries. I mean, oftentimes it's unexpected or traumatic in some way, I believe, not always. But so that first year, the body has a natural protection mechanism. Even if, I've encountered so many people who, at the bedside, they're like, they left peacefully, they left doing what they wanted to do. They knew, right, that it was the best thing for the person, that they're no longer suffering. I've encountered that many times. And yet those people still have their own process of grief that they have to navigate.
Logically, right? You could tell yourself whatever, right? As long as you're
So
head
you
to the heart.
still have certain aspects of healing that will need to be done.
Yeah.
But anyway, that said, so the first year is what I call taking care of business.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so there's always things that need to be done. If
Uh-huh.
it's a death, there's funerals, there's oftentimes estates, there's things that we might not be familiar with or new to us. So
Yes.
it's taking care of business. And then the second year, and sometimes in that first year, depending on when it happens, now we start to experience a first or two, the first year since or without. And then the second year, now that natural shock protection is wearing off, and we start facing more of those firsts.
Yes.
And so now we're facing them with less natural shock protection. By the third year, we have no shock protection left. And again, not a doctor, but this is just my experience and the people that I worked with. And now, generally speaking, that taking care of business is all done. And so now we're faced with the finality of whatever that loss event is. And I've had so many people over the years say to me, "Oh my God, what has happened? What has happened? Why?" And over and over and over again, people have said, "Oh, that makes sense." It's like, I can breathe. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm not broken. Like, you mean this is okay? I'm like, this is, you're right on time. Speaking of how we started.
Because it feels like all those things, the doing of the things or the cleaning out the room, getting rid of certain things, whatever it is a connection to your person, right? And then when there's nothing else to do, or there's, and then you're also left with yourself, right? Sometimes that stuff can keep us busy. It can keep us kind of out of the, oh my gosh, the finality also brings the severity.
Right. And not, again, to not get stuck in just the death of a person, right? It could be the health of, limb,
anything,
or a diagnosis, or loss of limb, or loss of a relationship, or it could be, it can be any of those things. You take a high level athlete who has a career ending injury, and maybe for 2 years, they're doing everything that they can, top scientists in the world and surgeons and doctors, to get back. Or maybe that third year they're realizing, okay, this really is forever. And I really like to stress the point for people coming in, that it truly is more than just death. And I think, as people who are serving people who are grieving, I think that the more we can make note of that and be mindful of that and intentional about that, I think that we are going to do the world the greatest service by not just repeating that death is the ultimate loss.
And I actually find in the work that I do with people is that the death of a person could be the catalyst to then discover all of these other losses that you have not grieved. It's sort of like the opening of the Pandora's box. Is like, oh my, okay, now the lid is off. I'm feeling grief for the first time. And then we start looking deeper and deeper to all these other losses that you didn't attach or look at as a grieving experience. So I think that is kind of for a lot of people, the way into looking at more of this. But we have to wrap up soon, Anna. I could sit here and talk to you all day, my friend. So why don't you tell everybody where they can follow you, where they can find more out about you, how to work with you, what upcoming things you have going on, freebies, your book, all the stuff.
So the best place to find me, everything is on my website, and it's Anna. I know you'll have it in the show notes, but it's Anna with an H on the end. So ANNAH, AnnahElizabeth.com. This is the 15th year, Monday, the 16th. So this will air after that, but it's the 15th year anniversary of the first presentation I gave on this body of work. And so follow me, because over the next 2 months, I'm going to be continuing to roll out special events and special promotions. I say we're all neighbors. So join the neighborhood. I'm on Instagram and YouTube at Annah Elizabeth Heals. So join me there. I'm putting out a lot more content on YouTube now. And then the website, and my book is available on Amazon, Digging for the Light, One Woman's Journey from Heartache to Hope. And yeah, I love connecting. So please join, reach out. When you join the neighborhood, as I call it, on the website, you'll get my free quick clarity guide. That's a whole nother conversation, but it is a simple yet one of the most powerful tools that you can use to where are you at, where do you want to go, and to help you get out of overwhelm and create simple action steps that you can take right away to just make a little bit of forward movement.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I will have all of those links in the show notes. So you can just go there, click follow Annah, get her book, do all the things, follow her. Congratulations, 15 years. Wow. A lot.
Yeah, thank you.
That makes you quite evolved in your own personal journey and in this work, being able to express it, deliver it. I'm sure it's changed and morphed over the years. And thank you so much for sharing your heart, your wisdom, your courage with us to say some things that, have to be quite nuanced, and you do it so well. So thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. It's a joy to be here. I appreciate you having me on as your guest, and I look forward to more connections.
Yes, for sure, Annah. Okay, take care. I'll talk to you soon.
You too. Thanks. Bye.